Hello, and welcome to your dog training orientation for the Center at Animal Humane. This orientation covers both Civilized Canine Level 1 as well as middle school manners. Let's get started. In this orientation, we're going to go over some brief history about Animal Humane New Mexico and the Center at Animal Humane. We're also going to talk about learning theory, how to manage your pet, the importance of focus and impulse control, socialization and generalization, and being prepared for a training session. Some of the basic supplies you'll be needing for class are a regular nylon or leather collar, a 5 to 6 foot leash, treats of course, your treat bag, a clicker, which is highly recommended, however this is optional if you choose to use a verbal marker instead. We highly recommend closed-toe shoes just so that you are prepared and have steady feet during training. And your pet may also wear a harness or a gentle leader. Animal Humane New Mexico was established in 1965. We've been at 615 Virginia Street Southeast since 1969. We are a nonprofit 501c3 organization, which means that we have to raise or earn all funding in order to operate. And we operate on a $6.5 million budget annually. Our shelter offers multiple services. Adoptions, of course. We also handle admissions. And we take in pets as the owner surrenders, strays, as well as transfers. We are known as what's called a destination shelter, which means that we transfer in pets from all over the state to be placed in loving homes. We have an outreach program called Learn Humane, where we work directly with children as well as adults in the community to teach humane education. We have a huge volunteer base. On average, we have about 400 plus volunteers, which equals almost 21 full-time employees that help us out in our clinic, dog walking, cat cuddling, events, and more. We also have a tremendous foster program. We have a thrift shop, which typically brings in about 10% of our annual operating budget. And as you already know, we offer training. We offer classes, we do private consultations, and our shelter staff runs a free behavior helpline. Now let's talk a little bit about the Center at Animal Humane. The center was established in 2016, where we opened our agility fields, and then our training program, and now daycare and boarding. The services that we offer are daycare, boarding, of course classes, consultations, as well as seminars. Now let's get into the training. Let's first talk about learning theory. You'll hear us talk about this a lot, but we like to reference the ABCs of learning, which stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. An antecedent is a thing or event that existed before or logically precedes another. Meaning, this is what happens that causes the behavior to happen. Behavior is defined as the way in which one acts or conducts oneself, especially toward others. And then consequence, a result or effect of an action or condition. Two great names in the dog training community is Pavlov and Skinner. Pavlovian theory taught us about dogs and the predictability they can have with the handler, especially in regards to food. B.F. Skinner taught us about the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. So let's talk about positive reinforcement, negative punishment, positive punishment, and negative reinforcement. A good example of positive reinforcement is giving a dog a treat for good behavior. But it's more than just treats. Positive in this sense means that we're adding something to reinforce behavior. Negative in this sense means that we're taking things away to discourage certain behaviors. Utilizing the left side of this chart is extremely powerful, and it gives the dog the ability to make the choices themselves, and then we reinforce those behaviors. On the right side, positive punishment is adding bad stuff to decrease a behavior. This could be pain, which we do not recommend. Negative reinforcement is delaying the bad stuff to increase a certain behavior. And negative reinforcement only works when positive punishment is put into place. The left side has very little side effects other than good behavior. The right side can be detrimental to your pet, so we recommend utilizing the left side. So why do we use positive reinforcement? Well, it creates predictability for your dog and helps build trust in your relationship. Reinforcement increases your dog's desires to do behaviors that you like. So as long as you are reinforcing certain behaviors, then those behaviors continue to happen more. It's fun and enjoyable for everyone involved, both you and your pet, and it works. Why don't we use positive punishment? We don't use positive punishment because the inconsistency and unpredictability it causes between your relationship with you and your pet. The more punishment, the harsher the punishment needs to be. There's something called building stamina, and we don't want your pet to build stamina to pain. This does not show what we want. It only shows what we don't want, which can cause confusion. Utilizing positive punishment too much can also cause fearful or cautious behavior, and later can be exaggerated and turn into things like aggression. Although it's not always the case, we try and prevent that from happening because it is very possible. And then there are different types of positive reinforcement. There's something called primary reinforcers and secondary reinforcers. Primary reinforcers are things that the pet needs to survive: food, water, and shelter. Secondary reinforcers can include verbal praise, touch, delivering toys, and so on. Anything that the pet likes but does not need to survive. So let's talk about clicker training. Clicker training is a positive reinforcement training system that incorporates the use of a marker signal to tell the pet precisely what they are doing at that precise time. In other words, it teaches the dog what we want. All the clicker is a noisemaker. It means nothing to your dog until you give meaning. You will teach them that click means food. In class, we will also be pairing this with a verbal marker. Some other rules for the clicker is if you click, you must treat. We always want to keep that relationship strong so that the dog understands the predictability of the clicker. Think of a clicker as a camera, and you're going to be taking a picture of the exact moment your dog offers a behavior. We want to click right when they complete the task that we've asked them to do. Keep in mind that this is not a remote control for your dog, so there's no need to point and click at them. And also, this is not a recall button. So let's practice. For this exercise, you're going to be charging your clicker. All you need is your dog, treats, and a clicker. Or if you'd prefer, you can use a verbal marker like yes. First, go to a quiet room with your dog. We want this to be in a low distracting environment so you can have the highest rate of success as possible. You're going to get about 20 treats, and you can use kibble, you can use treats, you can use whatever your dog enjoys. You're going to click and deliver the treat. For this exercise, your dog does not need to be doing any behaviors. All we're doing is pairing the sound with food. Sound, food, sound, food. Going back to Pavlov, this is what he did in all of his research. He learned that if he presented food, then the dog started to salivate. But there were behaviors that happened before this, like the person walking into the room. The dog started salivating when the person walked into the room, even though the food had not been placed in front of them. We're just conditioning the dog to understand that the sound of the clicker means the delivery of food is coming. So you're going to repeat this about 20 times. I recommend that you move around in different positions to keep your dog engaged with you as well. If you just stand there and aren't very active, then your dog may get bored and walk away from you. So let's watch this quick little video and get you to practice using the clicker. Timing is everything, and it does take practice, so feel free to repeat this video or practice on your own. Let's watch.
Let's practice clicking as soon as Naya sits. So as soon as her butt touches the ground, that's when we click and toss a treat. So let's all practice together. To help give you a visual, there'll be a green circle that appears on the screen when you should be clicking. Okay, now let's practice. Now let's practice with down and sit.
If you feel like you need more practice, just go back a few minutes and keep practicing with this. You can obviously practice with your own pet as well. So remember the rules for the clicker. Do we use the clicker to get your dog's attention or to call them to you? No, we don't. The clicker simply identifies correct behavior, and you click as soon as the dog offers the behavior you ask them to do. So now let's talk a little bit about management. Teaching behavior is great, but you live with this dog, and this dog is going to want to do different things at different times. Just like a child in a crib or a playpen, sometimes it's necessary to manage our pets in something very similar. We don't want this to happen, and if you have the dog who's doing this, then I would recommend taking these suggestions. Confinement is a good thing for a dog, for a number of reasons. Going back to the ABCs, if the dog is presented with a situation where they're left alone and bored, that's your antecedent. The behavior may be this. So by using the confinement, you can actually prevent those behaviors from happening. The next then is this circular fencing that goes around the dog, or just simply use a crate. Putting barriers up may be necessary as well. If you have a dog who constantly barks at the front window because people are walking by, that's called practice, and we want to prevent practice from happening if they're doing the behaviors that you don't want them to do. Schedules are great for dogs because it creates predictability. If a dog knows that something is coming at a certain time, and you've taught them to sit before they eat, for example, they may go over to the place where they eat and automatically sit. That's called offering behavior. And in the end, that's what a good dog does. The biggest thing is preventing bad behavior from happening. The other thing to consider as well is whether or not the pet is allowed on furniture. Rules for furniture is something that can be case by case and house by house. I would suggest that you talk to your family and decide on what is and isn't appropriate. Also consider with puppies specifically, that if you want the puppy to be off of the furniture as an adult, then don't allow them to be on it as a puppy. It's much more difficult to change that behavior than it is to prevent it from happening in the first place. Especially for puppies, but some adults, it's good to know what is good and bad for pups. You can download this app on your phone, and I would highly recommend that you write down this number so that you can have it in your phone in case of an emergency. So before your class, you're going to want to condition your dog to the clicker, which we talked about before. This is just a reminder on how to do so. Click, then treat. And I suggest that you be in different positions so the dog is in condition that only when you're standing, you're clicking and treating. I recommend that you do this 3 to 4 sessions, or if you feed multiple times a day, you can do this just during your meal time. You could easily pull out 20 pieces of kibble from their dinner or their breakfast and click and treat, click and treat, click and treat, and then deliver the rest of the meal. And then the next meal, do the same thing. Again, you can do this during meals or during training sessions, your preference. Focus. Some of the exercises that we do to teach this is the name game. Skyla and Naya. Those are focus cues for my dogs. You can also say something like, watch me. We're going to practice something called Doggy Zen in the first week, and then my favorite, hand target, which teaches a dog to not only get placement, but also to look away from something and refocus on you. We're also going to do some impulse control exercises. Food bowl waits, which is getting your dog to sit and wait until they're released to eat. Settling on a mat, which is placement, or asking them to go to a specific area like a rug or a dog bed. Recall, of course, coming when called. Leave it. And door waits, which is very similar to the food bowl wait, except for instead of them getting fed, they get to go through a door. When you're thinking about socialization, a lot of people consider dogs playing with other dogs or dogs interacting with people. Socialization is much more than that. It's people, places, things, as well as other dogs or other animals. Keep in mind that sometimes socializing can be a little stressful, just like what's happening in this picture. This might be stressful, but in the end, we can learn that it's fun. As long as the pet is safe and not too stressed, then we can learn from those situations. Now let's talk a little bit about generalization. In the course that you've signed up for, we're going to use management techniques in order to get your dog to learn the behaviors we're teaching in the class. This does not necessarily mean that they can do it in class and outside or in a more distracting environment. This is a general list on how to progress your training into more difficult situations. First, just simply start in your house. It's the easiest place because it's the most familiar to your dog, it's the most predictable to your dog, and they will likely pay attention to you. Then, try it in your backyard or your front yard, whichever is less distracting. Then, simply go out to your sidewalk or go down the street a little bit. The amount of stimulation just a few blocks away from your house is completely different from the stimulation at your house. Then go to a nearby park where maybe there's more activity happening. Specific to Albuquerque, you can try and go to the duck pond or a heavily saturated area where you know there's going to be people and dogs. Places like Home Depot or Lowe's can be a great step up. Feed stores as well. Albuquerque is an amazing city because we're very pet friendly. We have a lot of pet friendly patios. We even teach a class at a brewery, so you can take your dog to the pub. But keep in mind that they should be good in all of these stages before we put them in a situation where they're going to be stationary and you're also going to be distracted. A pet store, and maybe a dog park. When we say dog park, we are saying outside of the dog park. We would never recommend you bring treats into a dog park. But walking on the outside of it, you have a lot of sense stimulation from all the pets eliminating before they go in, as well as the pets coming out, plus the visual stimulation of all the dogs running and being active. Here's a couple of simple training tips to make more successful sessions. Distraction-free learning. With people, if we're engaged in our phones, then we're not going to be fully engaged with the people in front of us. So make sure that we're starting in low distracting environments first. Have your dogs focus before any training session. What we're talking about here is something that I like to call priming. Warm up with known cues before doing more difficult behaviors. Remember, prevention is key. Don't allow access to things that your dog makes mistakes in. Going back to the example of your dog barking at the front window. If your dog is barking because they want whoever is out there to go away, guess what? They're always going to go away if they're walking down the street, and your dog is going to look at that as a consequence of their action. Antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So prevention is key. Remember that treats have different value. Plus, treats may have different value in different environments. Just because your dog works for their kibble inside your own home does not mean that they're going to work for it at a pub. Remember to set realistic goals. If you're dealing with a young dog, I like to take the 7-year rule and apply it to the dogs. So if you consider our education goes through grade school until 18, and then most folks go on to educate themselves until their mid-20s. So you're looking at about 3 years, maybe 3.5 years, where your dog is most capable of learning behavior. Keep in mind that your dog, the younger they are distracted. The older they are, they just may not have as much motivation. So set realistic goals for yourself and always stay positive. So preparing for next week, make sure that you have a 5 to 6 foot leash, a regular collar, a harness, treats, and of course, your dog. Thank you for watching. We can't wait to see you.